Kate Tempest, thank you very much for joining us today. Lovely to see you. So you've got a book coming out, your debut novel. It's been a string of debuts for you, hasn't it, over the past few years? And The Bricks That Built the Houses is almost here. How are you feeling about it?
Yeah, I feel better about it. There was a bit where I felt really, really terrified about it. But now it's out. It's actually out. It came out a couple of days ago, Thursday. And now I'm starting to realise that it's out. It exists. I feel good about it, I think. I feel really excited and proud that it's finished. I've been working on it a long time, and I've been able to see it in the future for quite a long time, and now it's finished, done, it's out. So it's a strange feeling, but I mean, it's not quite like the kind of raw rush of like, yes, my album's out, but it's a different kind of like, like novel out, different feeling.
So the characters that we encounter in the book, anybody who's heard your album will, obviously the chapter titles kind of refer to the link in with the song titles, and the characters will be very familiar because it shares a narrative. How much did you create those things together? Did they all come as a piece? How long have you been working on the book?
Yeah, I conceived the whole thing as a whole. I began writing this novel and that record. It all happened at the same time about 3 years ago. But then, obviously, the first draft of a novel is a long way away from the novel that will eventually be published, especially if it's your debut novel. So, over the course of me then touring the record and the record coming out, I was writing in the back of the van. I was writing like in between shows and things like that. So the two things have been so interconnected because I was gigging the record and singing about these characters all night, and then spending the day trying to finish the draft of the novel. The idea was always that the tracks would correspond to the chapters. I went into the studio with Dan to write that record with the first draft scribbled out in a notebook. And so the first draft of the chapters informed the first draft of the tracks, and then as the tracks came to life, they looped back into informing the second draft. And then eventually I realised that the two worlds, they were holding each other too tightly, and there was a very important moment for the development of the novel where I realised that there was a kind of beautiful symmetry between them, but the novel needed to be its own world and to kind of hold its own space. It's the closing chapter in a body of work that I have been visualising and working on for about 5 or 6 years, including my first play, Brand New Ancients. Everything has been building towards getting this bit of work finished. Like the way I work is in 4 or 5 or 6 different pieces that I'm kind of usually doing at the same time. Like they push each other forwards. So finishing this thing this is the last kind of bit of a kind of forward push that's been happening constantly for about 5 years.
And what is that rooted in? Because all those things are rooted in a place, and obviously that's London. And I think one of the really interesting ideas in the book, obviously you have this kind of very propulsive, dramatic story and these amazing characters, but you also have this idea of a city and a place, and I love the title, The Bricks That Built the Houses, and this question of, do people make cities or do cities make people? And that is one of the things that you're kind of, I'm not quite sure, and I wondered what you thought about it, because as you say, this is part of a selection of projects which are all rooted in London.
Well, yeah, not just London, but a very particular corner of the city, which is where I grew up and still live, South London, South East London. And I feel like the kind of shock that I've absorbed through a kind of relentless immersion in thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions of people, life, bodies, stories. I think it would be impossible for anybody to grow up amongst that amount of life and not be completely touched by it in some way, and it has to come out somehow. Like lots of people that I know from where I grew up are also making work, we're musicians or painters or writers of some sort. There is something that happens where my internal landscape is kind of as busy and populated as the external landscape that I've been grown up in. I feel like this maybe is, like I'm saying, it feels like I had to get this out. This kind of, it's like a kind of love song and an elegy and a kind of howl of complaint, but also celebration of a place that is changing rapidly. And I do think that the people make the city make the people. Like it's a kind of constant feeding in and out. It's this kind of gorge and purge situation that cities are full of. But yeah, it's like London has a huge part of me and is a huge part in me. But I'm beginning to be able to see over the parapet of kind of my youth and young adulthood. This is part of that as well, of being able to just go past it and feel a bit more like able to make sense of that as that bit, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And now it's time to look at other places. Do you know what I mean? Leave.
So this is a working class story as well, and one of the things that I found really interesting and compelling about it is that every character gets a backstory. Some of the characters don't even know their own backstory, like Leon, for example. We know things about him in his family history that he doesn't. We know who his dad is. He doesn't, for example, as part of the book. And I wondered about the idea of like telling a working class story from the inside out, you know, and really getting a sense of kind of who these characters are and why they are the way they are. I think that's something that's not often afforded to working class stories, especially in novels.
Well, the Leon situation, so I'm interested, as you probably know, in mythology. I've always been interested in it. I think it's like this kind of the stories of lineage and descendants, and how like this kind of great light is carried through generations, and there seem to be always in mythology this kind of relationship between the immortal and the human, and this like struggling. And I've always kind of found it to be very relevant to life in a city for some reason. That there's just it always felt that epic. But then what I'm interested in is how in our times, in contemporary society, in our times where lots of people grow up without fathers, or they don't know. We don't know our lineage. We kind of denied access to that particular point. So how then can we carry on, with this kind of epic that it feels like we're all in the middle of? And Leon is a kind of example of that, I suppose, which is that he doesn't know who his dad is. He doesn't know what a great man his dad was, and where that came from, and how much kind of fight and passion and fury is in his line. What he knows is just his own space. He knows himself. And actually, Leon's whole vibe is that he's probably the strongest character within the book, even though we don't really get to know him that well, in terms of his kind of his private life, the way he is just so present and secure in his own self, I think hopefully speaks about the strength of his present tense particularly, and how he can kind of feel the magnitude of his kind of line by just being present in his own moment. I don't know if that doesn't really answer your question about working class stories, but that's just that's kind of something I've been thinking about with Leon, because I like him a lot, but he's kind of on the outskirts of it all. But I like his vibe.
I like him a lot. He's one of my favourites, and I like this. He's the kind of this idea of, as you say, like a real hero, I suppose, but one who doesn't understand his own kind of heroic qualities. But I feel
like to go back to what you're saying, the idea is always that everybody is comprised of much more than we give people credit for, including, yes, our whole history, but also the complexities and difficulties and kind of joys of every single human experience is so vast. And the fact that we are constantly kind of expected to fit into the most recognisable and easy bracket for whichever kind of exchange might be going on in the moment. And yes, that's probably the easiest way that we can deal with the magnitude of people that we pass by and encounter each day. But I've always been interested, and actually not even interested in, but it has always happened to me that when I walk down the street, I am very aware that each human body I pass is full of a life and death, and like a kind of epicness, a hugeness and a humanity that I feel connected to. Mm-hmm. And I think that empathy is a big thing in for me, and hopefully in my work, but definitely in my head and in my heart. And I wanted the novel to kind of carry a bit of that weight, that at any moment, the present tense is this kind of tiny little thing, really, that goes through the novel. The fact that the novel shares a plot with a record that people may have already heard means that actually what happens, although it's a kind of fast-moving plot, it's actually not that important what happens. The present tense that moves through it is informed by this kind of magnitude of the past, the future, people's kind of internal stuff that's going on. And at any moment we could just jump away from the present and just get to know about someone's granddad. Mm-hmm. It's like And that's kind of how I experience life anyway, you know.
So the book and the album and as you said, Brand New Ancients, were all set in South London, South East London. What does being a Londoner mean to you and mean for you? How big a part of you is it, do you think?
Well, it's a huge part of me, but I've known no different. So, I mean, I identify everything that I learned with the place that I learnt it in. You know, like, it's been a massive part of my journey towards becoming the artist that I am and the human being that I am and the woman that I am and the daughter and the friend and the sibling that I am. It's all tied into the place because I've never left. The same South East London, I've never left that postcode. And so, like, where I think a lot of people that I know come to London to find a home, they have to leave where they grew up because they need to find themselves in a place. I have this strange thing where I bump into people from primary school in the pub, you know. I'm still in the place that I grew up in, the kind of little village in the big city kind of vibe, but also it's London, so it's offered me access to so much kind of creativity and like gigs and, you know, opportunity and all that kind of stuff, and the fury and the fastness and the despair of a big city and the things that you have to see and the stuff that it does to people that are not ready for that kind of life. So, you know, it was all that stuff, everything that I've learnt there. But then I don't know if that's just life, and I would have learned it anywhere. Do you know what I mean? It's just like, for me, like, South East London has given me a particular sensibility, and one that I recognise it in people, you know. If I watch people walking down the street, watched these 3 women the other day just walking down the street. One of them had a little kid, the other 2 were just hanging out. I think they were going to college or whatever. Just something about the trainers they were wearing or whatever. There was just something about what they were, just the way they were hanging out together. It was like, yeah, South London girls. I don't know, I can't. And South London girls are often kind of undersung. I think so anyway. Mm-hmm. But there's just a kind of sensibility with it where it's kind of like, there's a chilled element, no nonsense element to people, but a kind of hardiness and a passion, I find anyway, you know. But people probably feel like that about anywhere they come from. So even though the book is set in a very specific location, I hope that I feel like the more specific I am in the story that I tell, the more universally it can be understood, because everybody has that specificity when it comes to home. Mm-hmm. So yes, it's about my home or the home of these characters, but the more local my truth can be, then I hope that connects with the kind of locality of your truth. Or
absolutely,
I hope anyway.
Yeah, well, home's an interesting subject, isn't it? It's an interesting idea because it is universal and completely individual at the same time. You know, yeah. we all have an equivalent for that. People will be asking a lot about gentrification with this book, I would have thought, which does come into it to an extent. There's you know, certainly towards the end of the book, we get the sense of the city changing, which is obviously what London has always done. Mm. What do you think of your corner of the city and how it's changed over the past 10, 15 years?
Well, yeah, it's changed, it's changing. But then everywhere, I was thinking about this the other day, and this might seem completely far-fetched to say, but I kind of I tried to get at this in an interview the other day, but I didn't quite get there with it. But so yes, land is being sold off to investors to be exploited for the most amount of profit. That's hurtful for us, the people that populate that land, because we feel attached to that land and the culture and the people that now can't afford to live there, and it's changing and it worries us. But if we just zoom out a little bit and we look at how that represents the kind of global culture of greed, because the common thing in all this, what I'm about to say, is greed, and that's the operative word here, because if you think about what's happening, well, in Peru, it's, you know what I mean, like the land is being exploited for its wealth, so palm oil companies, palm oil manufacturers are buying the Peruvian rainforest to raise it to the ground at the expense of the cultures and the people that live and survive on that land, and also all of us, considering that rainforest is the lungs of the earth, as they say. If you think about what's happening all over the planet, so not just in kind of natural places where, like the rainforest, or in urban places like the city where people are using the land, this is happening everywhere. And I'm not against people coming or going from a place. The world needs to be about flux and change, because very soon, and I'm sorry to say this, I feel like there's going to be a lot of the planet which is going to be uninhabitable. So if I'm going to turn around and say, yeah, well, I'm all for kind of open borders and people moving across the planet, but actually no yuppies in South London, I can't say that. That's hypocritical and it doesn't make any sense. I'm all for people moving and being welcomed into places. What bothers me more than anything is this kind of unwillingness to actually be a part of the community that's there, that exists there, and building these kind of gated communities that don't want to partake in what was there before, but just see it as a kind of redundant patch of land to be built on afresh for profit and gain. And I mean, I know it's kind of strange to even ask for there to be any kind of commonality between the situation in London and the situation in the rainforest, but the only reason I bring it up is because this is a global concern, this is a huge problem, and there will come a point where we can't exploit the land for the wealth anymore because it will be too late for the land and for us, you know?
I think it's interesting though, and I see what you're saying. I think one of the things that is specific to London is if you think of London's kind of product, so you think of the thing as London grows, one of the things anyway, as culture, then that is an interesting comparison, because if you have, say, look at Soho, for example, you take Soho and you take the kind of like cultural crucible that's been for obviously a really long time, but for example, since the 50s, so it's the kind of the 40s, 50s birth of kind of rock and roll and, you know, gay culture and all these kind of different subcultures and things that are happening, and the effect that gentrification has on that, which is, you know, as you say, to kind of come in and it changes. I think from a kind of artistic and cultural perspective, there's a specific kind of concern around, as you say, this idea of gentrification, which means a kind of monoculture sweeping in and completely removing everything else.
But then everything else will survive. It always has. Like the arts, culture, it will be all right. We'll be all right. Like we'll just go somewhere else. Like it's difficult because people whose families and who have lived on land for a long time have suddenly found themselves relocated to places very far away, and they have to. It's very difficult for them to kind of keep their jobs. They have to find new jobs, and this is the real problem with it. Is for the people at the lowest, on the lowest rungs of our societal ladder, this is the people that it's affecting the most, and unfortunately, these are the people who are least heard, and that's something that's problematic and worrying. But I mean, I feel kind of confused about it because I know there's so much conversation going on about it everywhere, but I kind of feel like London's it's constantly been a place of kind of change and migration and I'm worried about it, but I'm worried about the planet. You know, I'm worried about everything. So it's like I'm not really the best person to say what's to be done. It's just like, and within the novel, obviously, like the fact that it's set in this place. Becky, one of the characters, leaves. She comes back. She feels the change. Like, of course, because I feel the change. We all feel the change. It's happening around us, and it's going to go into the novel because it's happening in me and in the place that I'm from. But it's not necessarily like a kind of loaded political statement, or it's not meant to be a symbol for something bigger than itself. It is simply just like, this is happening, and it's happening within this world I've created because it's happening in the world that I inhabit as well.
Mm-hmm. And I suppose that's big cities. That's London. You know, you can't stand in the same river twice, and that is, as you say, there's an inevitability about that. How was it writing a novel for the first time? What made you want to do that and try that form out when you've done so many other things already?
Well, I wanted to write a novel all my life. I think many writers probably do, and lots of people, I think, feel genuinely they have a novel in them. But what I realised, I didn't have an idea that merited the form. Like my desires before to write a novel had been more about this kind of ego-driven desire to be a novelist, rather than an idea-driven desire that this idea is big enough and merits a form that is this epic. Mm-hmm. And then the idea came for what was Everybody Down and now is also The Bricks. And when that idea came, it was just such a relief in my brain, because it was like, this is the idea, this is the novel, this is it, this is the first novel. I can feel it. I could literally feel it. And then it's been epic writing it. It's like walking around with a concrete hat on. It's like all day you're like, fucking hell, it's so heavy, because you have to create a universe. You have to create a universe. You have to know everything about everybody. In the second or third draft of the novel, it was about 4 times as long, because I had to know everything about. There was characters that you will never meet, that I just had to investigate every single little avenue of how that universe worked, which I then lost the majority of it, thankfully, because the novel didn't need it, but I needed it as the writer. Mm-hmm. I learnt so much about the form. Like, I've always loved novels. Literature and music, they're the before poetry even, it was fiction and music.
And where did you start? Where was it, you know, what were your kind of gateway drugs with both of those? I think it was hip hop with music.
Yeah, it was hip hop, but it was like also, I was listening to a lot, before hip hop I was listening to Michael Jackson a lot, but like, listened to a lot of reggae, but maybe that was after hip hop. Like Bob Dylan, I was listening to a lot of Bob Dylan because of my dad. And like pop music when I was like 8, but that's alright, you know, it's like forgivable. But then like with novels, yeah, hip hop was the one that was just like, this is it, like this is me. But with novels, it was it's kind of hard because whatever I say, it's kind of going to be made up because I can't truly remember. Like, you know, people have these like dynamite moments, but for me, it was just all literature. You know, I had that about everything I read, even if I hated it. It was still a joy to me to read. So, you know, I could pick. I used to love Ursula Le Guin. She wrote these really cool kind of sci-fi stuff. I used to be kind of into her when I was a kid. But then also, you know, the kind of cult teenage fiction-y stuff that I was reading quite young, and you know, like just that stuff. But
what, the Luke Reinhardt and Hunter S. Thompson and all that kind of thing, or?
Yeah, exactly. Hunter S. Thompson and kind of J.D. Salinger and like. Yeah, To Kill a Mockingbird and like the stuff that you read as a teenager, like that you're given to read. But the stuff that really got me, well, I suppose what I can say more truthfully is what's getting me now, which is Don DeLillo and a guy called E.L. Doctorow, who wrote a book called The Book of Daniel, which I discovered quite recently, which absolutely floored me. A woman called Castle McCullers, William Faulkner. I read Joyce whenever I can, and Beckett as well, and like just there's such a wealth, there's so much stuff. Yeah, blah blah blah. I could talk about it all day.
And again, I mean, it's interesting that you say you love Joyce so much, and you know, there's someone who's very rooted in their specific place. I think there is something very special about that, isn't there, in a writer, when you know they can kind of evoke a moment in time and evoke their home.
I think it's this kind of sensibility of like the outsider or the person that doesn't quite, you know, you look at your city or your surroundings and the people around you because you're looking at them because you're not amongst it. There is something about a writer, I think, that I have so much love for everybody, everything that I see, and I love them. I want to understand them. That's what sends me to the page. But I think it's it's like not feeling quite like you're in that.
Well, you're always on the outside looking in.
Something like that.
Aren't you? There was an interesting, I'm reading this collection of Gore Vidal essays at the moment, and I read it straight off the back of reading The Bricks That Built the Houses. And one of the things that he says quite early on is that, you know, every good writer makes themselves classless by their writing. And I think it's about that idea of kind of adopting a position that's outside of whatever it is that you write about, whatever, you know, wherever it is that you come from. You know, as soon as you kind of sit in that chair and you're an observer and you're creating that world, perhaps you step outside of it a little bit. And like, can you actually, is that ever possible to like truly represent without being present in the representation? Oh man, yeah, that's a really... I don't know, it was a big thought, but it was interesting reading it, you know, just after reading your book. Yeah, right. I wondered what you would think about it. Yeah, I mean, that's an interesting point. I don't know, really. I don't know. The book's got everything in it. It's got drama, it's got love, it's got family, a lot of sex in the book. I think quite a bit of sex. Interesting. Yeah, I mean, like, how was it writing the sex scenes? Wow, I really didn't even, I would not have even thought. I don't think of it that way. I mean, the book is, it's essentially, yeah, it's about love. It's a love story. And, you know, sex is a huge part of love if all's going well. Do you know what I mean? But like, I don't know, now I feel like incredibly cringy and like fucking I'm trying to remember what it says. Like, but no, I mean, it's a love story, man. It's a beautiful thing, what they find and then what they decide to leave behind. It's the catalyst for what sent me to write this novel, as well as the idea and everything else in South London. This is
is love, is what made me, a relationship that I was in turned me to write. These characters began and end in a lived experience, which is, for me, is usually love, is usually what sends me to think about humanity, and, you know, it's because it brings you so much closer into somebody else's reality, and no matter how many characters you can create, you never know what's going to come out of somebody's mouth, you know. It's so interesting to be in love with somebody and to be like, oh, so fascinated and still surprised, you know. And that for a writer, especially when you spend so much time kind of creating characters or sending them out onto stage in plays, and like to actually be confronted with the reality of how somebody else's brain works, which is what happens when you're, you know, in a beautiful relationship. It's like endlessly inspiring, because you're like, how, who, you know, that whole, which is, I think, was the kind of beginning of of Becky. Anyway, the character Becky kind of came out of that.
Yeah, she's a wonderful character, Becky, and she really is a fantastic kind of literary creation. How does it feel to you know, be in a place where she has her own theme? You know, she's like, you've written songs for her, she's in the book. And are you looking at leaving her behind? You know, does it feel strange to be saying goodbye to these characters that have been with you for such a long time?
Well, no, because like I said at the beginning of this interview, I've been working towards getting this bit done for a long time, you know. They have their space, like within, so Brand New Ancients is Gloria's story, Everybody Down and The Bricks is Becky's story, Wasted, which is my first play, is Charlotte's story, Charlotte, Becky and Gloria, best mates. The world, you know, it's big enough. Like they have their space, they've done their thing. And like, I mean, at the minute now, I feel like I'm ready to move on. Like the next record, one of the characters does survive into the next record, but yeah, I mean, they're not...
You're not going to tell us who?
I'll just leave it there just for a minute,
Yeah,
just in case I decide to change it. But yeah, I mean, maybe with time, maybe she'll come back into my brain and ask me to write something else for her, but right now, it's like, I think it's done. I don't know.
So you have a kind of sense of peace about it, isn't that?
I mean, I think so. I hope so. It's either peace or just exhaustion. That's one of the two. I don't know.
Well, it's a wonderful book. Thank you very much for talking to us about it. It's great to see you. Cheers, Kate.
Nice one. Cheers. Her London has changed. Becky looks around for all the things that she has missed so much, but nothing is the same. The snooker hall is gone, its foundations are wrapped in construction hoardings, and it stands 4 stories taller than it used to, rapidly becoming another block of luxury apartments. The half-derelict bridal store and beauty bar where she used to get her nails done and pick up weed, the one that had the mournful mannequin in the window, dressed in the same peacock blue sequin gown for years, is now a glass-fronted cafe with exposed brickwork and low-hanging lamps. She wonders what's happened to Naima, the woman who used to run the shop. She'd been a friend of Becky's mum, and she knew Becky's name before Becky did. The swimming baths have been bulldozed, along with the old town hall where she used to go to playgroup. The old police station, everything has been or is being turned into flats. The actual flats stand empty and black-eyed, their windows smashed, their fronts ripped off, their insides on display, wallpaper and old sofas and kitchen units shivering in the rain. The area secured. Cameras like crows on the tops of the fencing. She stands and stares up. She feels like stopping someone and shaking them and screaming, "What's happened here?" Becky watches all the strangers that she passes with increasing panic. Is it just her imagination? Or are these people really fuller in their faces, glossier, healthier, more robust? What's different? The streets are as busy as ever, but it feels empty. She steps into sunshine, holding down panic. They used to come here for breakfast every Saturday when they were hungover, and she couldn't face seeing her auntie and uncle. She feels a hopeless sense of longing for that time and looks around tentatively, glad to see that at least this cafe is still the same. Pictures of dogs dressed as aristocrats hang on the brown-tiled walls. Articles from the local paper are faded in their frames. Plastic chairs are nailed to the tables. People eat food from huge plates that are twice the size of plates. The chef has burnt some toast, and he is standing at the door, flapping it open and closed, but the door gets stuck and scrapes on the lino each time it closes, so he has to push it closed and then wrench it back open, and the whole thing is proving quite dramatic. She sits at the table by the window and listens to what people are saying, only realising now that for all the long months she'd been away, she'd been unable to listen to strangers speaking. She sinks into it. And on and on and on.